Gunshots lit up the cool Carson night, echoing off the walls of a crowded parking lot. People scattered between cars as tires screamed down the street, and somewhere in the chaos, a man lay still under the yellow glow of the lights. Back in an apartment near LAX, the air sat heavy and no one spoke, the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes. A kid who once had the biggest house on his block now stood over a body tied to a blood set his hood had beef with. Some kids grow up dodging the hood, some grow up in it, and some go looking for it. Mule Buchanan, known later on as Kels, was born on November 24th, 1994 in Los Angeles, California, and he spent his earliest years in Westmont, an unincorporated patch of South LA that mixed two worlds in one place. There were streets where lawns stayed cut and houses stayed painted, and there were streets where sirens cut through the night and walls carried the marks of set politics, and his block had pieces of both sides. His father was a music producer who had credits tied to Master P and Lil Romeo, and those royalties kept coming in through the mid-2000s, keeping the family comfortable. His mother was steady too, keeping the house together while making sure her son had structure. And they lived in a 7,000 square foot, 6-bedroom home that sat as the biggest spot between Normandy and Western. Out back, there was space for family cookouts and games, and in the garage, there was space for friends to hang when the street felt too hot. His grandmother's house sat close by in the 100's, giving him another home base in the same neighborhood. From early on, Kels had hobbies that pulled him into open spaces. He spent hours skateboarding on smooth sidewalks, practicing kickflips and slides until he got them clean. He rode fixie bikes with friends through the side streets, weaving between cars and catching the wind, and he played pickup football at the local parks where games ran until the streetlights came on. Dancing was another thing he took seriously, and he joined in on the jerkin crews that were making noise across LA during the late 2000s, showing up at meetups and battles where style mattered as much as the moves. Around the block, older heads knew him as a respectful kid who could adapt to different crowds, and his friends noticed how easily he could make people laugh or feel like he belonged in any group. Still, there was a quiet trait in him that shaped a lot of what came later. He liked to be accepted, and when approval came from the right people, he chased it harder. Kels's world had the kind of stability a lot of kids around him didn't see, but that stability sat right next to the kind of energy that could pull you somewhere else. Westmont was Rollin 100's Crip territory, with sets like the underground block Crips and original block Crips holding the area from 102nd to 108th Streets, and their presence was as normal as the corner store or the bus stop. Even in a nice house, you still learned who to nod to, who not to stare at, and when to keep moving. For now, Kel stayed on the edge of it, a familiar face in both the quiet corners and the louder ones, and his story hadn't yet turned toward the streets full time. When Kels hit high school at Washington Prep, he carried that same mix of worlds with him. He was the funny, cool kid who could crack a joke and keep a crowd moving between friends who stayed in class and others who skipped to hang outside. His skills in sports and dance kept him visible, and teachers saw him as someone who could push himself if he wanted to, but the pull from outside the school gates was strong. After some time at Washington Prep, his parents moved him to Narbonne High, hoping the change of setting would keep him focused, but the shift didn't stick. Kels had trouble settling in, and before long he was back closer to home, eventually getting expelled before graduation. Without school to structure his days, his social circle leaned heavier on the neighborhood. He wasn't fully in the underground block Crips, but he was close enough to be a regular face on 105th Street, shooting hoops or posted up with people he had known since middle school. It was the kind of association that kept you in certain conversations and out of others. And while he still kept connections with friends outside the hood, the balance was tipping. At his family's garage, dice games ran late with music playing and friends from the block stopping in, and block parties kept him in the loop on neighborhood business. He was still living between two versions of himself, one grounded in the comfort his parents had built, and one drifting closer to the street energy that was never far from his front door. By 2014, the line between Kel's two worlds had started fading, and the first big push came through a flocking case that made his name ring in the wrong rooms. Flocking had been a trend in Los Angeles for years, with small crews sliding into wealthy neighborhoods, knocking on doors to see if someone was home, and hitting the spot quick when no one answered. In that year, Kels was picked up in connection to one of these runs, a burglary that tied him to a crew moving out of the hundreds. The arrest report showed residential burglary as the main charge, and the court date that followed marked the first time he was looking at a real stretch behind bars. Getting hit with that kind of case meant more than just fighting a charge, because in a hood like Westmont, it also meant proving you could carry yourself when the heat was on. Older members from the Rollin hundreds watched how you moved in those moments. And for Kels, the time and county gave him a kind of credibility that just hanging around could never get you. By the time he came back around, word was that he had been officially put on with the Rollin hundreds block Crips, a step that locked him in as more than just a familiar face. Being put on meant you were now expected to represent, and that came with both opportunity and weight. The Rollin hundreds were one of the most active neighborhood Crip cards in Los Angeles, holding turf from around 102nd Street down to 120th, and with cliques like the underground block Crips and the original block Crips under that umbrella, the politics stayed live. Kels started showing up deeper in function spots, riding with members to other neighborhoods, and letting people know he was down for whatever work came his way. From there, his name started getting whispered in connection to more serious things. In the streets, people talked about him like he was putting up Rookie of the Year numbers, with rumors floating about shootings he might have been part of before his 21st birthday. None of those alleged bodies ever turned into official charges, but in a place where a reputation often mattered more than paperwork, that kind of talk carried weight. The years right after the Flocking case saw his rap sheet grow. Not long after coming home in September 2015, he was picked up again, this time for driving under the influence, and that was just the start. Loitering with a criminal street gang came next, then a charge for taking a vehicle without consent, followed by another burglary case. Each arrest stacked on the last, and each one made it harder to picture him stepping back into any kind of regular life. Within the Rollin hundreds, there was a certain mindset expected from members, something people in LA called the crash-out mentality. It meant you were willing to put yourself in risky situations without hesitation, especially if it meant showing loyalty or defending the set's name. For Kels, this mentality showed in the way he handled business, quick to pull up when called, ready to move without asking too many questions. The streets noticed that kind of energy, and so did the people in his own circle. By the end of 2015, the transformation was clear to anyone paying attention. The kid who once balanced skate sessions and jerkin battles with quiet nights at his family's house was now spending most of his time outside, around people who expected him to prove himself daily. His choices had shifted, his schedule had shifted, and the consequences of those moves were starting to stack up in ways that would be impossible to ignore. Before the Flocking case and the court dates fully took over, Kels already had a name in certain circles that had nothing to do with the Rollin hundreds back in the jerkin era. When LA kids were linking up for street dance battles in parking lots and parks, he crossed paths with other young movers who would later step into the rap game. One of those names was Daryl Caldwell, who the world would eventually know as Draco the Ruler. They were not close at first, but the mutual respect came from both of them holding their own in their lanes, whether that was dancing, styling, or just moving right in front of a crowd. By around 2014, that respect had turned into a tighter connection. Draco was starting to make noise beyond the dance world, pushing into music with a style that was different from anything coming out of LA at the time. His breakout moment hit in 2015 when the track Mr. Get Dough dropped with a DJ Mustard beat behind it, getting premiered on World Star Hip Hop and running up millions of views. That same year, his first mixtape had people in the city paying attention. And the Los Angeles Times even labeled him one of the most original voices to come from the coast in years. As Draco's momentum picked up, he began forming his own crew, one that blended family, close friends, and a few people tied into different neighborhood Crip sets. They called it the Too Greedy Family at first, but most people came to know them as the Stink Team. It wasn't just a music crew because the loyalty in that circle ran deep, and a lot of members were tied to neighborhoods that didn't move soft. You had people from the 30s, the 40s, and the hundreds, and even those who were not officially banging carried themselves with that same edge. Kels was one of the early locks for that circle. By 2014 and 2015, His bond with Draco had gotten close enough that being part of the Stink team was just natural. Their link got stronger when Draco was looking for promethazine codeine one night, and Kels's side of the 100's could make it happen. From then on, you could see Kels in the background of music videos, on stage at shows, and posted with Draco at different events. It was the kind of placement that gave him access to a new lane while still keeping him connected to the street side. The Stink team moved with a certain energy that fit the era. Designer clothes, foreign cars, money flashing on Instagram, and a soundtrack of aggressive, clever bars that called out rivals without hesitation. Draco branded himself as Mr. Mosley, but Too Greedy and the Stink team was the banner everyone in their camp repped. The crew was young, flashy, and unapologetic, and they used that image to build both their following and their reputation. For Kels, being in that mix was a boost in profile on both sides. On the music side, he was part of a crew that was headlining small venues and getting booked for bigger stages. And on the street side, he was moving around with people who had weight in multiple neighborhoods. The blend of gang connections and music exposure made their circle one that people wanted to be around, but it also meant they stayed in the view of both rivals and law enforcement. The nightlife, the studio sessions, and the trips out of the city gave Kels glimpses of a different type of success. But that was always balanced against the reality of who was in the crew. There were old rivalries that still mattered. And the way Draco called out names in his music made certain neighborhoods take things personal. By late 2015 and into 2016, tension was building in ways that had nothing to do with record sales. And for Kels, riding with the Stink team meant riding through that heat as well. Even with the music taking off, there was no separation between the shows and the street politics, because many of the people in the Stink team were active in their own hoods. Kels had now locked himself into two roles: the supporter and friend who was part of Draco front row, and the neighborhood Crip who was expected to hold the line if anyone pressed the crew. That dual presence kept his name moving in conversations across LA, from industry people talking about the next Stink team release, to neighborhood talk about who was moving where and with who. By 2015, the streets of Los Angeles were heating up in ways that brought old rivalries right back into the spotlight. For the Rollin 100's, one of the most deeply rooted tensions was with the Inglewood family Bloods, a set with history stretching back decades, known for holding down their turf around Rogers Park and surrounding blocks, their name ringing heavy in both local lore and the county jail system. The Rollin 100's had already built their own reputation across Westmont and beyond. Their conflicts with IFGB flaring up over territory, old grudges, and a constant cycle of disrespect. The wider LA gang climate in 2015 and 2016 was charged with the kind of pressure that made even casual encounters dangerous. And that summer, the city saw the infamous 100 Days, 100 Nights challenge, a street-born threat that predicted a body count of 100 in 100 days after a young man tied to the Rollin 60s was killed. And though the Rollin 100's weren't the central players in that challenge, the whole South LA scene felt the ripple, every set on high alert. The music industry wasn't separate from any of this, and by now, Draco the Ruler was building serious momentum with songs like Mr. Get Dough getting traction, but the fame also meant the beefs could spill over into bigger arenas. His issues with fellow LA rapper RJ weren't just about music, they tied into deeper gang politics, and in that world, disrespect through music could turn into bloodshed in the streets. Somewhere in that storm was a figure who would soon become central to Kels's story, a visible member of the IFGB known as Red Bull, his presence in videos and at events making him a recognizable face to anyone who paid attention to gang politics, and in the streets, recognition could mean trouble. Low-level clashes between the Rollin 100's and IFGB kept stacking up during 2016, shootings here, drive-bys there, each side tallying their own scores. All that tension was like dry wood stacked up, just waiting for a spark to set it off. The night of December 10th, 2016 was supposed to be just another night of celebration, a birthday party in Carson that drew a crowd big enough to make any set think twice about rolling through without backup. Security was light, the lot outside filling up with cars, music thumping from inside, people mingling and laughing like the air wasn't heavy with street politics. Earlier that night, a handful of the Stink team, including Kels, were posted up at Draco's apartment, kicking back before deciding to make the trip. They didn't move small that night, 5 cars deep in a convoy that rolled from the apartment to the Carson spot, the kind of move that told anyone watching that they weren't just random guests. Word travels fast at parties like that, and somewhere between the walk from the lot to the front door, Too Shitty, a Stink Team affiliate, pulled Kels aside, telling him straight up, "The families are here." That was more than just a warning. It was a reminder that the air in that party was thick with people who had history with the Rollin 100’s. And in that moment, Kels knew eyes would be on him. Inside, the music was loud, the crowd tighter than the walls could hold. And that was when Kels spotted him, Red Bull, posted and talking with his crew, his red gear catching the lights in the room. That eye contact between them wasn't long, but in street terms, it was enough to turn a normal night into a dangerous one. Witnesses later said it felt like the music and noise just dropped for a second, like both men had measured what came next in that brief look. The first gunshot cut through the baseline, followed fast by more. People scrambled, ducking and shouting, bodies pushing toward the exits, while the shots kept coming. Witnesses described seeing Kels with a .40 Glock in his hand, firing toward Red Bull's side of the room, while AB, another man from the convoy, was seen with a .38 revolver, his shots adding to the chaos. Outside, tires screeched as the convoy reassembled in the lot, engines revving, while people still screamed and ran from the building. No one in that circle spoke much on the ride back to Draco's apartment, the adrenaline still running too high, and the reality of what happened settling in. By the time the night was over, word was already spreading. Red Bull was dead, 2 others had been wounded, and the streets would be talking before the sun came up. Kels didn't hide from the talk either, because not long after he posted online with the caption, "Dead Bull," a line that lit up social media feeds and made sure no one missed who was taking credit for that night. The cops had been chasing threads on a separate case when they caught a wiretap mention of Draco, and that one slip pulled the Stink Team straight into their sights. Investigators started lining up names, voices, and possible connections, and the focus turned heavy on this crew that had been moving flashy for months. Detectives began piecing together visuals from music videos, especially the one called Chunky Monkey, where guns were in plain sight, a silver Infinity sat in the frame, and faces matched descriptions they had from party witnesses, all those details stacked up in reports that started building probable cause for something bigger. On January 2nd, 2017, law enforcement hit multiple spots at once. They came through with warrants, knocking down doors and pulling people from beds, taking phones, clothes, and anything that could link to that Carson party shooting. Kels was scooped up along with others, and the vibe inside the stations turned cold real quick. The detectives weren't working off just the videos and photos either. They had Perkins informants in play, those planted cellmates whose only job was to start casual talk and fish for confessions. They slid into cells like they belonged there, and before long, they had chatter worth typing up. One of those informants got AB talking, and in one of the reports, Too Shitty was recorded naming AB outright. That gave the cops an opening, and they leaned harder on the crew's weakest links. AB himself got caught speaking on what happened, telling an informant about being at the party, being armed, and not being the only one letting off shots. The name Kels slipped in those conversations like it was nothing. But in an investigation, nothing like that is small. From there, they dug up something that tied the scene to another man in the circle, Solo, who had a Facebook video showing himself with a gun that ballistics later matched to the shooting. That piece alone was enough to haul him in and start pressing. The detectives ran long hours in those rooms, pushing angles, talking about charges, and showing pieces of evidence just to break his guard. Solo's interviews got tense, and after enough back and forth, the pressure started showing in his voice. Little admissions and slips crept into the recordings until they finally had cooperation that connected more dots for the case. By the time all these statements, videos, and ballistics came together, the cops had a full chain they could walk into court with witnesses tied to the scene, weapons tied to suspects, and informant conversations filling in the gaps. Every move from that January raid had been aimed at building a wall around the Stink Team, and now the bricks were set tight around Kels, AB, and anyone else they could pull in next. By early 2019, the Compton courthouse was locked in with one of the most high-profile gang trials in recent LA memory, and the prosecution came loaded with a storyline that tied everything from Kelce's upbringing to that Carson party shooting, painting him and AB as the triggerman while pushing Draco as the mastermind behind a conspiracy to kill a known rival. And the jury pool had already been hearing the name Stink Team for years in headlines and music blogs. Solo took the stand and dropped a full breakdown of Carson Knight, saying he saw Kels raise a .40 Glock and AB fire off a .38 revolver into the crowd where Red Bull fell. And Solo didn't stop there. He pulled out extra stories on alleged shootings by Kels, dropping names of streets and situations, and even told the court about threats he claimed came after those incidents, all of it playing into the state's plan to show a consistent pattern of violent behavior. The DA also leaned heavy on rap lyrics and music videos, freezing frames from Stink Team visuals where Kels was in the background, showing off in designer fits and holding weapons, then matching those weapons to photos from the Chunky Monkey video and ballistics reports, trying to convince jurors that the music was more confession than art. Even with the defense pushing back, arguing that lyrics were creative expression and videos were entertainment, the courtroom atmosphere felt tilted, especially with the gang enhancement statutes stacking weight on every charge. And by the time the verdicts came down, the split was brutal. Draco walked free on all conspiracy counts, while Kels got hit with convictions across the board. The sentence dropped like a hammer. Life without the possibility of parole, plus 135 years. A number so high, it felt more like a message than just a punishment. And AB got his own parallel conviction and heavy time, leaving the Stink Team fractured and reeling. Families cried in the gallery while deputies moved the defendants out, and the reporters outside caught every word, every reaction, already spinning it into the next morning's coverage. While in the streets, the story of the rich kid from Westmont who went full throttle into a Rollin 100's lifestyle had officially turned into another LA cautionary tale. When Kels first stepped inside the California prison system, it was a whole different type of jungle, the kind where every move could mean respect or regret, and every word could pull weight or cause trouble. So he learned quick to keep his circle tight, his back covered, and his mind sharper than ever. The Rollin 100's name still carried him through those gates. And that meant he had brothers in blue rags ready to make sure he stood solid from day one. But it also meant eyes were on him from enemies who had been waiting for a chance to get even. He moved with discipline, keeping his head in the game, not letting small things pull him into unnecessary drama, yet still holding the flag high whenever it came to defending his set's name. One of the first major statements he made behind bars was getting a tattoo that crossed out the IFGB logo, a permanent ink line that left no doubt where his loyalties stayed. And that move had both respect and risk tied to it, because in a place like that, a single tattoo can be a battle flag. He built his daily routine around workouts, chess games, and long phone calls, keeping himself grounded while the years began to stack up. When word came in December 2021 that Draco the Ruler had been stabbed to death at the Once Upon a Time in LA concert, it hit him like a steel bar to the chest. Not just because Draco had been his boy on the outside, but because that was another reminder that even those who find success in the industry can still get caught in the same cycles they tried to leave. He spent that night in his cell thinking about all the nights they had laughed, plotted moves, and filmed music videos, and how quick the streets could erase a man's future. Kels didn't let prison silence him entirely. He tried to push music from inside, sending verses out through collect calls, working with producers who could piece his words over beats, and trusting people outside to keep his name alive in the scene. Ralphie the Plug, Draco's younger brother, kept showing him love, making sure his name still popped up in interviews and lyrics, and the hood still looked out for him, dropping money on his books and sharing stories that reminded him he hadn't been forgotten. Life inside didn't soften him, but it gave him too much time to think, and when he looked back at the years before his arrest, he could see that wild shift from being a rich skater kid with endless options to becoming a name that prosecutors brought up in murder trials. The transition wasn't overnight, but the end result was heavy, and even he knew it. He talked about it sometimes in letters, saying how the choices he made had stacked up like dominoes, each one tipping into the next until the last piece dropped in the courtroom. Even with a sentence that promised he would never see freedom again, He stayed tapped in with his people, kept his ear on the streets, and held onto the loyalty code he had lived by since the day he got put on. The walls might have locked his body, but they hadn't locked his voice. And for Kels, that meant the story wasn't done being told.